Hello and welcome to the Summer Sustainability Summit 2025. My name is Laura Drury and I lead sustainability communications in the UK and Ireland. You are joining the world's largest online event for sustainable construction and manufacturing, along with thousands of other people who want to drive decarbonisation forward. Carbon transparency is reshaping how we design, build and manufacture. And today we're joined by global leaders from every part of the industry, including manufacturing, infrastructure and industry associations. You're joining one of 3 global sessions taking place today. And this session will focus on how we need to truly come together to decarbonise the entire supply chain. In this session, you can expect insight and advice from UKGBC, Amey Consulting, and air conditioning manufacturers Daikin. But before we turn to our first session, our friends at Schneider Electric have created a short message for all of you today to explore how data can decarbonise the built environment. Coralie, over to you.
Hello everyone, my name is Coralie Vergez and I'm a Director of Partnering for Sustainability at Schneider Electric. I've been passionate about sustainability for the past 20 years and it's a real pleasure to be with you today for the 2025 Summer Sustainability Summit. Today, I would like to talk about a partnership we have been building between Schneider Electric and One Click LCA and that I have been leading since April 2024 when we first met with Panu Passanen, One Click LCA's founder and CEO. Back then, Schneider Electric was about to launch its environmental data program, the result of 20 years of effort in making our environmental data available and accessible. As we talked with Panu Passanen, it became obvious that One Click would be a great ally to amplify our efforts in terms of accessibility. Indeed, we'd heard from our customers and partners that the lack of environmental data for electrical and mechanical products was a pain point for them. It was hindering their environmental impact assessments and reporting efforts, and it made it harder for them to reach a given voluntary sustainability standard or even regulations. As a company, Schneider is committed to walking the talk and bringing its customers along a responsible and impactful journey to sustainability. This involves reducing the environmental footprint of our value chain, our own operations, and the use phase of our products and solutions. And it also involves making sure the environmental data of our products and solutions is available and accessible. So to increase the accessibility of our data, we decided that we needed to put our information where our partners and customers needed it to be. So with One Click LCA and its 20 plus plugins, including Revit Autodesk and IES, we are able to go a step further in terms of accessibility. Now, we have more than 50,000 commercial references with transparent environmental data on One Click LCA, including EPD digitized data and product technical characteristics. And this number will keep growing. So what's the impact for you, and more broadly, the architecture, engineering, consulting industry? Well, ASA professionals leveraging One Click LCA now have access to 50,000 electrical equipment commercial references with environmental data. They can simply consult it, add it to their projects in building ACA tools, or import the data to other software partners through OCL's plugins. So this should help AEC professionals gain in efficiency and accuracy to meet sustainability standards, regulations, or goals. Now, the journey is only starting, and we'd love to hear from your feedback, as well as what you expect next. For example, what are the use cases where you need Schneider Electric product and solution data? Or how can we increase accessibility? We look forward to hearing from you through our contact page on One Click LCA or se.com so that we can build a sustainable future together. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the summit.
Thank you so much, Coralie. This is really great progress. And if anyone watching wants to learn more about the Schneider partnership, you can find a link in the comments section of the show. Next up, we are turning to the first session in today's show, and this panel session is all about how we can work together as an industry to decarbonise the entire supply chain. And I'm delighted to be joined by three speakers who will be sharing some very valuable insight from three very different perspectives. We have Simon Matthews, Advancing Net Zero Advisor at UKGBC, Dijon Marples-Wall, Senior Carbon Consultant at Amey, and finally, Matteo Dall'Ombra, National Specification Manager at Daikin, UK. Before we get started with today's discussion, I'll ask each of you to share just a short introduction for our audience today. So Simon, if you could go first.
That's great. Thank you, Laura, and thank you very much for the opportunity to join the panel today. So I'm Simon Matthews. I work as an advisor in the Advancing Net Zero team at the UK Green Building Council, where I've been working for slightly less than a year. And prior to that, I worked in architecture in a sustainability capacity over 6 or 7 years.
Thanks, Simon. Dijon?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Laura. Welcome to everybody. My name's Dijon Marples-Wall. I'm Senior Carbon Consultant with Amey's Energy Transition and Sustainability team. So I've been with Amey for getting on for 7 years now. My background's in environment and sustainability schemes. I've been helping the business get upskilled on PAS 2080, particularly the transport infrastructure sectors in road and rail, and then more latterly in the built environment with our energy team and with our strategy team, helping our procurement and our government level clients also sort of come along on their net zero transition journeys.
Thanks, Dijon. And finally, Matteo.
Hello, everyone, and thanks again for the invite in this session. My name is Matteo Dall'Ombra. I'm the National Specification Manager for Daikin UK. I've been with Daikin 13 years in various roles, but now over the last couple of years, I transitioned over to this role in sales, working with a team spread across the UK that together we work with mechanical engineers, designers, specifiers, so we can advise on the best strategy for HVAC design and help with the drive to decarbonization of the building stock.
Amazing. Thanks all for being here. So I think let's get straight into the discussion for today. So we're talking about the challenges and strategies around reducing carbon across the supply chain. And I want to start with you, Simon, just to help us set the scene a little bit. So let's talk about why this matters. What do we mean by supply chain decarbonisation?
Okay, good starting question. And yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? But to try and simplify it, it's basically recognising that we're all working in the construction industry, the built environment, are heavily reliant on our supply chain, those who supply goods and services to enable us to construct and use our buildings. And the decarbonisation part is very much around trying to reduce our carbon emissions associated with those goods and services. So the protocol for sort of recognising those carbon emissions are what most people will recognise as Scope 3 emissions. So Scope 1 and 2 emissions sit within the control of an organisation. Scope 3 sit within your supply chain. So that's very simply the definition.
Brilliant. Thank you. And then just to move on, I think the next question I want to direct to you, Simon, is why is reducing embodied carbon across the construction supply chain now critical to achieving national and global climate goals? And what's the current state of progress in the UK specifically?
Okay, again, a really good question. I think having already mentioned, the majority of emissions do sit within our supply chain. Typically in the built environment can be anything up to 80% or possibly even more. So clearly, if we want to reach net zero by 2050, we have to engage with our supply chains. I think the critical part of that is very much around what we would term sort of collaboration and support. So I think historically engagement with supply chains has been sort of fairly simple. We need a product, we need a service, we need it by this date. this is the price point we're willing to pay. And it's quite a sort of potentially confrontational approach. Decarbonisation is very complex, and we're all learning about it, and we need to learn fast. So we are very much of a view that we need to collaborate and support across our supply chains wherever we sit within those. And in terms of the second part of your question, what's the current state of play? The UK Green Building Council, as many of your viewers will know, and those joining the call, published our whole life carbon roadmap at COP26, and that illustrated the sorts of steps we need to take between now and 2050 to decarbonise the built environment. Well, the origin of data for that goes back to 1990, and in 1990, 23% of emissions within the built environment sat within embodied carbon in the supply chain, and that was around 70 megatons of CO2 equivalent in that particular year. By 2022, so the year after the roadmap came out and the last full set of data we've got, that then accounted for 37% of the total carbon, the whole life carbon within the built environment. And we'd only reduced by about 10%, actually slightly less than 10% from 1990. So as we've worked in other areas, and we'll pick this up later, we'll see that more and more of the focus is moving on to embodied carbon.
That's great. Thank you for setting the scene so brilliantly there. And I think next we'll kind of move in the direction of roles and responsibilities across the supply chain to dig into that a bit more. And I want to ask this to both you, Dijon and Matteo. In your opinion, what roles do different stakeholders like product manufacturers, contractors, designers and clients, what role do they play in driving embodied carbon reduction, and where do you see the greatest leverage points? If we start with you, Dijon.
Yeah, I think for me, having to use PAS 2080 for my day job, I think it's got a really good, neat explanation and shows the interconnectedness between all of the moving parts of this, as Simon mentioned, a very, very complex issue to deal with. And what's great about PAS 2080 is that then it opens up for each individual area of the web, if you like, supply chain, suppliers and manufacturers, designers. It sets out all of those responsibilities. The difficult part of that, at least for my part of the world, is it's a very different kind of standard to an engineering standard where this number is good and that number is bad. It's very different to that. So one of the to sort of bring that and hammer that home to the question, the point that I've been making to the members of our teams are that they are the gatekeepers of that data. That data for the projects on things like material quantities and longevity and design lives, that each member of those value chains are gatekeepers of really critical data. A point that Simon made about that the data in 1990 in the landscape looked very different to how it does now. I think that's been a key lever, if you like, to pull within my part of the world, where I've been able to speak directly to highways engineers and designers and built environment specialists to draw that data out of them.
Matteo?
Fair enough. So I think from our point of view, from a manufacturing point of view, we see our roles, I guess, in two different ways. Like the first one, there is a significant part of still education toward the industry. When we talk with our client, with our partners, we are essentially starting with them at almost a new journey, despite the fact that many of these are not necessarily new things, new concept for some other industries. For the building industry, it's a bit more recent, and especially when you go down to that level of detail of saying all the myriad of components that you have within a building, it can get pretty complicated pretty quickly. And so that's why I think we see ourselves as also playing that part in terms of learning and making sure that we can share the message, we can share the importance. Now that we do have effectively all the data that we can provide to clearly show why we should care about these and how easily, in a sense, by making even very simple choices, you can immediately show the difference, you can immediately show an improvement, you can immediately sort of make the situation much better. And then on the other side of the equation, I think our responsibility as a responsible sort of HVAC manufacturer is making sure that the data that we have, we then use it internally to continuously make our products better. Because at the end of the day, we know that if we can do that, we can immediately sort of pass those savings or those improvement to the rest of the chain. Because at the end of the day, of course, we represent, so the Simon was alluding at the beginning, we represent a good part of Scope 3 emissions for our partners, for the people that use our products. So by improving the way that we manufacture, by changing the way we manufacture, by being able to lower embodied carbon over time, we can then pass on that saving along the chain effect.
Brilliant, thank you. And I have a question to kind of elaborate a bit more on what you've both said there, and I'd like to start with Simon's response. So from each of your perspectives, where does accountability lie for embodied carbon performance, and how can that accountability be shared or better defined across the value chain? If we start with you, Simon.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, Matteo pulls out a really good point there, that the interesting thing about Scope 3 emissions is that if I am able to reduce my emissions, it will help someone else reduce their Scope 3 emissions. We get double the return. So this whole idea of collaborating is so important in this sector. And we all sit within the supply chain in different positions. We all buy in products and services. We all supply products and services. So we can see both sides of it. And we might be in the supply chain as direct emitters, either upstream or downstream. But we also, many organizations and people are in the positions of influencing. For example, when I worked previously in architecture, we don't currently contribute direct emissions from our buildings, but we have a huge influence over what can happen within that building or that infrastructure. And similarly, there are many organizations such as UKGBC who are very much facilitators in the space. And again, we can have a huge impact. So it's a matter of trying to engage with our supply chain and share our knowledge wherever we can.
Dijon?
Yeah, I think at least from my experience, I think accountability is it seems it's shared. You know, there are parts of the equation. I mean, certainly, manufacturers, but also, in terms of installers, maintainers, operators. I think as I get older and get into the twilight of my years, I'm liking a racy chart more and more. And again, past 2080 is really effective at that. But I see a lot of poor ones, where there's bleed across roles. I think it's better, at least from my perspective, to have accountability across each of the members of the value chain, as Simon alluded to. I think it helps if we all understand and we speak the same language, which is why we've got shared tools, like when we've used One Click across an entire supply chain. That's really helped us, and certainly when all of them have got members of the value chain who are past 2080 literate, if you like, who can all speak the same language and we know where we sit. I think the quick answer is all of us, just like health and safety is everybody's responsibility. I think all of us have got at least to a lesser or greater degree, have got some accountability for reducing carbon performance across the whole life of an asset.
Yeah, it definitely echoes everyone's opinion in terms of saying that fundamentally at the end of the day, we are all in the same industry, we all work together, each with sort of different responsibilities. So we all have a part to play in this overall journey to take us toward true sort of net zero at the end of the day. Certainly as a manufacturer, we do sometimes feel a bit more of a heavy burden in a certain sense, because at the end of the day, embodied carbon, a lot of it comes from and stems from how we manufacture the products. What are the choices that we make? What is our supply chain that lead us to the materials that we use and to the manufacturing process that we use? Which is also, for example, why let's say one of the core principles of Daikin has always been to have as much as possible local manufacturing. And when I say local manufacture, we tend to divide the areas where we work with in macro regions. So for example, for all the European Union, we do have a lot of factories within Europe, so that we don't need to import materials, or we don't need to import even finished products from that far away, so that we can limit, for example, emission associated with a lot of those longer distance transport. Certainly, for example, working in the UK also immediately held us to higher standards in terms of, again, how we work with the supply chain because of all the rules and regulation within the European Union. So we certainly see our role, let's say, as being very important in overall at the end of the day. And as I said, we're always there trying to improve how we do things to do our part at the end of the day.
Brilliant. Thank you, all of you. I'd like to just kind of move slightly in the direction of the tools that are enabling better carbon transparency and specifically environmental product declarations. And I think the views on environmental product declarations from not just manufacturers, but from across the supply chain is really interesting. We're seeing a huge uptick in manufacturers needing EPDs because of outside pressures, whether it's clients or, you know, evolving regulations and things like that. So if I can just direct a few questions to you around that, I think that would be really fascinating. And I think to start with, you know, how important are environmental product declarations in enabling carbon measurement and reduction? And what are the barriers to wider adoption, in your opinion? And I think I'll ask, I think we'll stick with you, Matteo, and then perhaps move on to Simon for this one.
Sure. Yeah, there's no doubt that EPDs are an incredibly important tool when it comes to be able to share the data and share it in a format which is as standardized as possible, which also means that allows designers and users to essentially take those documents and make comparison, make informed decisions at the end of the day in terms of where they want to go. It's certainly been a process, and I think again here, I think what we can do from a Daikin perspective, I think we are in a very lucky position in a certain sense that we are such a large group that we can spot some of the trends maybe going around even different countries and be able to anticipate changes then in other parts of the same regions. EPDs are a clear example of that one because, for example, we saw the initial demand coming from France, for example, where they do have very specific governmental legislations around when you need it and why you need it and what are the consequences of not being able to provide such information. This is certainly not true yet in the UK, but again, we see, as I said, we see this trend moving around. So it's sort of not unlikely to make a guess as saying, well, it started somewhere else, but if it's going really well, other countries will copy the same approach. And so in that sense, even if we only started with one country, then we had the tool to scale quite rapidly and start to look at other countries, which is why then we were able to fairly quickly start to offer the same documents, even with values that are UK relevant and based on the product actually coming into the UK. And as I said, that the ability and the possibility of having the document wasn't just good for our customers, for our partners, but it was also very much massively important for us because it immediately highlighted area where we kind of need to go back to the drawing board from a manufacturing point of view, saying how can we improve this specific segment of how we manufacture our product to again deliver the best possible return from a lowering of embodied carbon. So it's very much a two-way thing. It's very important for the industry to be able to make very clear, informed decision. And it's become immediately also very important for us in the first place to make decision and strategic decision on how we go about manufacturing our product. And I think the second part in terms of the barriers, probably the biggest learning as well is that when you start it might seem like it's a very difficult process to go through in terms of taking your product, breaking it down to the incredibly smallest component, and building it back up again, going through all the data gathering exercise that you need to do to provide this document. And certainly, depending on how big and how complex the products that you manufacture are and what your product portfolio overall it is, it may seem like an impossible mountain to scale. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge, is sort of setting it up the first time. But on the other end of the spectrum, I think that also is something that can become easier over time. So you can maybe start small. You just pick your most popular product. And again, I'm thinking back at what we did. We started choosing what were the most popular, the most sold products. Make sure to add information from there, use that to learn the process, learn where we can optimize the process, where we can share some of the resources, and then progressively you scale up to cover everything else in time. But it's certainly doable. It's just something that you need to plan, and as I said, continue to stick with it and just make it easier over time.
Great, thank you. And how about you, Simon?
Yeah, I mean, I think incredibly important. Ultimately, they're the source, or should be the source, of really good and robust data. And the old adage, what gets measured gets done, is really important. I would think for pretty well any product or service, even if we're not involved directly, most of us could make a guess about how much it might cost. But I suspect even in areas where we are actively involved, most of us would struggle, except perhaps at One Click LCA, to come up with embodied carbon data for those products. So I think the data is just really important. EPDs are relatively new to the industry, and Matteo has already highlighted sort of one of the challenges around comparability between them. I think that's something that hopefully will improve over time. Also, their availability can be challenging across a range of products when you're particularly trying to make choices. And for those not technically involved in their production, they can be quite challenging to read. So whether there's an opportunity to sort of work to a simple summary or pull out overall sort of global warming potential figures, which I know are sort of highlighted in them, that could also be useful.
Excellent, thanks. And I have a question around EPDs for you, Dijon, as well. Just to kind of finish off this part, I guess, and that's, how does the lack of embodied carbon data for construction products, or EPDs, how does it impact construction and infrastructure projects further down the line?
Yeah, I think I was half expecting Simon to say garbage in, garbage out when it comes to modelling, because that's exactly what I was thinking in terms of data quality, and that is obviously something that EPDs just cut down at the knees. When a project comes to me, and I'm working with designers, there's often a huge amount of detective work done in carbon assessments when I'm working on the front end with the data book. That can be made much harder when we don't have good quality EPD data. And I've seen professional level, in inverted commas, EPDs that have been released, which have been dreadful. I think on the flip side, I've seen quantity books that have been provided by design teams who've got all the information upstairs, but it hasn't really been measured. It hasn't really been quantified and put into an EPD. And I think that certainly is something that can streamline the process. So I think from a simple perspective, having EPDs when we're working with clients and suppliers in the value chain that have got EPDs, it makes my life much quicker. It makes assessments more traceable when we're getting BSI audited and they're coming around taking a look at our work. We can verify where our work's come from. There's traceability and accountability right the way through the project. That's really critical if we're trying to not just decarbonise the industry, but also to improve on reputations and avoid greenwashing.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks everyone for that. And I'll stick with you, Dijon. I want to move on slightly and talk. We've talked a lot about the value of kind of increased engagement across the supply chain. I want to ask each of you, how do we do this? So what are the most effective ways to engage and support suppliers in improving embodied carbon performance of products and operations. So I'll stick with you, Dion, and then perhaps Matteo, and then Simon.
Internally, I work with a lot of clients who've all got their own, I work with a lot of QSs who are working with their own sort of particular platforms, be that Candy or Causeway or a MUSP, or it could be an simple Excel sheet. I think rather than everybody seems to be rushing around to try and derive tools, I think rather than look into the tools themselves, I think it's important that we get them to use what they've already got. And that we can, the beauty about using One Click here is that I can take the outputs from all of those platforms, load those into a One Click pro forma, and then just generate a carbon model based on that. It can be as quick as that. I know this is a short-term solution because there's still to some degree an element of duplication of work. I think the direction of travel that I would like to see is that there are tools and systems which basically can speak to each other. I know that is the case with things like BIM and MicroStation, that they can all interface. That's a real challenge that I come across when I'm working with clients internally, is that it's still a tough sell to explain to them there is some duplication of work. I see the direction of travel improving on that. I see tools being able to cross-talk and cross-pollinate, and then we end up with carbon models which have been derived again from similar data sets, from good quality data, but using procurement tools if you're in the procurement world, or quantity management tools if that's the world that you're in. That again I think would really speed the process up and really alleviate some of those concerns over duplication of work.
From our side, I think we very much want to be seen as enabler all of these processes, and certainly not blockers. Our focus would be very much the one to continue to produce the data, to continue to produce high quality data, to expand and cover, at the end of the day, fundamentally 100% of our product portfolio. We already sort of started. As I said, we started some years ago with the first few documents. It's now really becoming an ingrained process from our side, to the point that EPDs should become fundamentally a default type of document that we produce, the same way that we produce all sort of other documentation for all sort of compliances with rules, regulations, standards. We see EPD very much becoming the same thing. So whenever there's a new product, you get the manual, you get the energy label, you get the EPDs. So again, making sure that, as I said, the data is there, we're enabler, we're not blockers, so the data is just publicly available. Anybody that needs to use it to make the assessment can do it very simply. Don't have to send emails, phone calls, can become a very self-service type of approach from that point of view. So yeah, that's I think where we do see for us the best way to collaborate with the rest of the industry.
Yeah, and really just from our perspective, picking up on Matteo's point there about collaboration, we see our role very much around sort of convening and trying to collaborate across the supply chain. We are in the first year of a multi-year work stream looking at supply chain decarbonisation at UKGBC, and one of the parts of that we're looking into is to encourage mentorship from organisations that are perhaps more advanced or have a better grasp around sort of decarbonisation and embodied carbon issues, to work with suppliers who are at a more nascent stage of their work, to try and encourage and support them and really build ongoing partnerships. And look out for the output from that work stream later in the year. We're producing 2 guides, one on procurement and one exactly on supplier engagement, which is really aimed at sort of high level things that organisations can do from their own perspective to really start working more closely with their supply chains.
Brilliant, thank you. I think that idea of mentorship and kind of sharing knowledge about how we do this is going to be really interesting to watch unfold. Okay, so I'm going to finish with a big question for each of you, and we'll start with you, Simon. What's the biggest challenge? So is it technical, financial, cultural? What's the biggest challenge in reducing embodied carbon that you foresee, and how is this kind of evolving role of industry collaboration going to help us overcome this?
I think it's probably cultural. I think we are still working in a capitalist, monetized society where our focus is still and has long been on price and delivery. And we really need to try and sort of widen the scope. Those are still very important to the way we operate, but we need to include our care for the planet in the way we approach that to try and radically transform the sustainability of the built environment. Collaboration is absolutely the key to that. You know, we have, I think, 700 members or thereabouts in the UK Green Building Council. That only represents 10 or 15% of the whole built environment. So there's a huge number of organisations out there. And if we can just reach out to one or two closely engaged in our supply chain, and we can encourage them to reach out before we know where we are, we'll have connected up, started to share our knowledge, and really moved the dial.
How about you, Matteo?
I think, well, initially it was certainly the data gathering step of the process. That was something that took us a while, mostly because being something new and being something that required a lot of introspection to a certain degree from our point of view. Also, given the complexity of our own supply chain, that it was certainly the biggest challenge, and in some areas and for some product it still is, although, as I said, it's becoming easier and easier to deal with over time. But then if I flip on the other end of the spectrum, so looking more outward, it's still the fragmentation of how and why this data is being asked to our customer and partner, for example. If I think of the building industry, there's a gazillion type of different standards, different regulations. They can be a national level, they can be a local level. Each of them might ask slightly different variations of the same theme and the same tune. So you are never 100% sure of saying, well, if I provide you this document, you will have exactly everything that you need. There might always some adjustment that needs to be made here and there. So certainly it would be great from our point of view to see a bit more of a coordination, standardization, so that we always ask the same question, so that we can always provide the same answer, and we can speed up those processes, making sure that at the end of the day we still achieve the goal that we have that we set ourselves with, which is again decarbonizing the building industry. And then I think the final challenge is in general communications. And when I say communication, is in relation of, we have these documents, like we have EPDs, we have these informations, but I think it's still at a too technical level, too sort of engineering level. We need to find a way as an industry to simplify the message, simplify how we put forward and put across this type of documentations, so then everyone within the chain can be fully understanding of what is the importance of using this data and what can you do with it, and not just maybe the engineers, but you also need to, for example, you need to have the people that, like the investors, like the one that are behind a project from a commercial point of view that might not necessarily be hyper technical. We need to have the right message for them as well, so they are fully on board. They can sort of fully appreciate the value of using the information, which might lead to make certain decisions over others while the project is moving forward. But again, none of these are impossible challenges. It's just requires a bit of time. But I think the good part is that we see everyone kind of joining and moving in this direction at different speeds, but fundamentally everybody's on the same journey. So that kind of tells us and sort of signals us that things will get better and we'll get there. We just need probably in some areas try to pick up the speed and pick up the pace. But I'm certain that we'll get there.
From my perspective, I'd echo a lot of what both Simon and Matteo had mentioned there. I think for me, there are challenges in all three. I think the tech I think has been developed, much to a much quicker degree than it perhaps had when we started having this conversation around decarbonisation, perhaps a decade or two ago. I think the principles about how those assessments and quantification of carbon within projects, that's made the financial question a little bit easier in terms of things becoming more automated, things becoming data becoming better. It means I'm not having to spend quite so much time resourcing members of my team to go and research for carbon factors. There's still huge headwinds, I think, is fair to say, from my perspective, culturally, even in my small part of the world, where speaking to engineers, designers, I think that there's still work to be done with that. I think one of the issues that I find regularly is that that people are disengaged. I think there's certainly some political and cultural and social headwinds. But what's helped, certainly from when I've been out in upskilling parts of the business here, is that once I've been able to get buy-in from some of those engineers who see their role, once it's been explained and it's been their piece of the puzzle, if you like, has been sort of identified for them, we can get buy-in. I've never met an engineer that doesn't love to talk about what they do. I haven't met one. They love talking about what they do, which is great for us, which means we get to learn about where products sit in the life cycle, where it's appropriate to use certain types of products, where it's not appropriate to use others, being able to lean on relationships, and develop strategies to be able to use products which are appropriate, backed with data which is viable and traceable and auditable, to build infrastructure which is going to be effective, low maintenance, which is going to lead to lower whole life costs. Certainly that's been a headwind that I'm still trying to break through, this tension between capital costs and whole life costs. I think there's still work to be done there. But that's the ideal that I think I certainly am shooting for, and hopefully many others, the majority, is shooting for. Some may say that I'm a dreamer. I'm not the only one. I'm sure somebody can write a song about that. But that I think ultimately is what we need to be heading towards, and only by identifying those roles within the industry and getting buy-in, I think we can break through those cultural challenges and hurdles.
Amazing. Thanks, Dijon. Inspiring words to finish up with. It's fascinating to me to get the insight from, these different areas of the supply chain and that kind of unifying message that we're all on this same journey. We have the same goal, it's just about how we work closer to get there. So absolutely brilliant session. So yes, thank you for all of your insight. I'm absolutely delighted that you could all join. And once again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Laura. That was a very interesting talk. If you've missed the previous session, I'm Steven from Product Marketing at One Click LCA. And today I'm going to talk to you about something that's going to make One Click LCA even better. Across the built environment, one shift is clear. Carbon data is now a business critical requirement. It impacts permitting, procurement, and credibility. In our 2025 Carbon Experts report, 83% of AC professionals confirmed that environmental product declarations influence their material choices. At the same time, over 60% have already achieved embodied carbon reductions using LCA insights. But many still face data quality issues, fragmented EPD availability, and resource bottleneck. That's what we address with the One Click LCA Power Pack. For designers, engineers, and consultants, carbon performance is increasingly tied to project success, but poor quality LCA data remains a risk. One Click LCA's Power Pack for construction professionals solves this in 3 ways. First, AI-backed plausibility checking and internal verification workflows reduce the risk by ensuring your LCAs meet the required quality and consistently. Second, Carbon Designer 3D's generative design and the LCA chat assistant give early-stage carbon feedback instantly, supporting informed trade-offs during design. Third, automated reporting templates enable the delivery of branded certification-ready results in minutes, saving significant time and reducing review cycles. Manufacturers face a surge in EPD demand, especially in Europe, the UK and North America. Yet 81% of surveyed manufacturers identify the complexity and cost of EPD creation and verification as a top barrier. One Click LCA's Power Pack for manufacturing and EPD professionals enables you to run pre-verification with our EPD quality checker to catch compliance issues early. It allows you to manage multi-site operations through centralized data inputs, allowing you to generate unlimited project-specific EPDs. And third, it allows you to export globally relevant branded EPD reports in multiple languages, supporting both compliance and client trust. From the EU's construction product regulation to buy clean mandates in North America, the carbon requirements in the UK, policy is converging on one thing: verifiable whole-life carbon data. The Energy Performance of Building Directive mandates embodied carbon reporting in 2028. France RE 2020, Denmark and Finland are already enforcing caps. And over 90% of manufacturers expect regulatory pressure to increase. This is not a future problem, it's here now. Automation, high-quality data and credible verification are the only scalable responses. To close the gap between intent and implementation, the sector needs to scale, and scale requires automation. One Click LCA's Power Pack exists to make this possible with the tools built for your workflows, compliance frameworks, and business pressures. If you want to learn more about the benefits of One Click LCA Power Pack, click on the link in the comments. Over to you, Laura.
Thank you, Stephen, for that overview of our Power Pack. Welcome to the next session of today's summit, where Matteo Dall'Ombra from Daikin will be talking about how EPDs for their heat pumps are enabling the team there to measure and save on embodied carbon. If you did join us for the panel session earlier, you'll be familiar with Matteo's background. But Matteo, if you don't mind, can you just give us a quick intro into yourself and the work that you're doing at Daikin?
Sure. Thanks, Laura, and hello again to everyone connected to this session. My name is Matteo Dall'Ombra. I'm the National Specification Manager for Daikin UK. I work with a team that is scattered all around the UK, and our main interface, the main audience that we work with on a daily basis, are designers, specifiers, so all that technical audience whose job is to take heat pumps products and design them into their building. So our job is making sure that they can do so in the easiest possible way, and most importantly, with the most amount of information as possible, so they can do very detailed product selections and design. And speaking of data, speaking of information, the industry, as of lately, is really focusing on the concept of how can we decarbonize the building environment and the building stock. And so this is what I'm going to talk to you about today, is what is essentially the main tool that we have at our disposal that we can use to see, are we on the right track? Are we choosing the right products? Are we making the right decision from a technology point of view to help decarbonizing the building stock? So before we go too much into the details of the actual environmental product declaration, I just want to give you a brief introduction of why we are here talking about these tools. As I said, the direction of the industry is decarbonizations. At this stage in time, there are two main areas from a carbon point of view that we are really focusing on: embodied carbon and operational carbon. Embodied carbons are fundamentally related to how you manufacture a product. So all the steps that starts from raw material and takes you all the way to final products. And then operational carbon is what relates to the moment that you flip the switch on, we start to use a certain amount of energy, to the moment we turn it off for the very last time and we go into decommission. So those are the two areas. As you can see in this chart, again, as of today, operational carbons are the biggest contributor to the overall carbon segment. And this is because it's very related to what is the grid, so how green the grid is. And at the moment, it kind of varies but it's still there's work that needs to be done. But the expectation is that it's not always going to be the case. So moving forward, moving into the future, we do expect embodied carbon, so the actual manufacturing stage, to be way more important and way much more, given the fact that, as I said, the green grids are coming, they are improving, they are becoming greener and greener over time, more renewable energies. And so we know as a manufacturer that we will be even under increased scrutiny from a point of view of how do we manufacture our system. So how do we make sure that we can minimize the environmental impact that our products can be associated with. And so across the UK, but also across Europe, there are already rules and regulations that are starting to become very, very specific and very prescriptive in terms of what you should do, maximum targets from a carbon point of view, and some of them are prescribing tools to be used in order to be able to say, yeah, I'm respecting your limits. And these tools are, guess what? EPDs, so our environmental product declarations. In France, they are pretty much mandatory for the vast majority of new buildings. In the UK, not yet to that stage, but single local authorities, such as the GLA, they are starting to impose a stringent limit on all life carbon calculations. And so we already find ourselves in the UK having the requirement to be able to provide certain data. Again, not as a mandatory thing, but certainly the direction seems to be going in that path. So fundamentally, what is then an EPD or environmental product declaration? It is fundamentally the equivalent of an energy label for carbon. Like for when you buy a TV, when you buy a toaster, a kettle, you will find an energy label that says from A to G how good or how bad it is in terms of how much energy we use. EPDs do the same, but for the entire carbon footprint of a product. They need to be certified under very specific and very stringent international standard. And as you can see, they have a shelf life of 5 years. And the reason for that is because we also want to make sure that we can progressively show improvement the more, again, responsible manufacturer go down the path of improving how we bring our products to market. And so that is, in sort of very broad terms, what an EPD is and what it looks like. So fundamentally, as I said, it's really a case of how do we calculate and how we show the full environmental impact of our products. Now, when you open these documents, they are huge, lots of numbers, lots of very in-depth type of information. Two main things to keep in mind to make sure that you know what you're reading and you're reading the right information are these two concepts, this sort of slightly higher level concept of reference product versus functional unit. Now, a reference product is fundamentally the specific product that a manufacturer has chosen to run all the all-life carbon calculations. And so in our case, the specific capacity of one of our latest VRV systems. Next to that, you have what we call a functional unit. The functional unit, what it allows you to do is, say you don't have a size 12 in your project, but you got a size 16 or a size 8 or any other one which is not the reference product. How do you take the information contained in EPD and make it useful for your specific project with a functional unit? So fundamentally, it allows you to break down the carbon emission into a smaller chunk. In our case, it's normally related to single kilowatt of capacity delivered. And then you can take that value and you can scale it up and down depending on where you need to go, depending on what is the actual unit. So no matter what it is, as long as you find the right product, the right document for the main product, you will always find a way to become specific for your project. Now, if we have a look at what is actually included in an EPD, everything is included. So as I said, every single step, including the operational stage. It's broken down into a lot of categories. And I just want to walk you through some of the main ones. So again, you know fundamentally what to expect when you go through the document. So the stage A, again, refers to what is that make up the final product. So what is you can see the breakdown in terms of larger categories of materials and then a bit more specific. And here we can already start to derive very important and very sometimes surprising type of information. Things like, for example, in our VRV system, turns out that one of the biggest contributors in terms of a carbon footprint is the PCB, which is also the single smallest almost component inside this product. And the reason being a PCB is made of a lot of very noble metal, some of which are difficult to extract as raw material. And so the associated carbon with that specific supply chain is fairly heavy. So it's not great on one side, but what it does allow us to do is shine a spotlight on areas where we can improve. And we are already doing so by, for example, increasing the amount of recycled raw material that we bring into our factories so that we can rely less and less on continuously new extractions. So that's where a manufacturer can make significant steps by having a full analysis, full in-depth analysis of exactly where all the bits and pieces are coming from, and then make strategic decision in terms of how do we change that for the better. The second important stage is the in-use or the operational one. And this is where it becomes really important to understand where physically you are installing and running your product. Because the previous step, so the material step, doesn't matter where you are. As long as the product comes from the same factory, which in our case does, it's made of the same composition of material. So that stage will be exactly the same no matter where the product will be finally installed. But the operational stage, it's massively tied to wherever you are in the world. And again, in here, we need to break it down further. So when you look inside here, you will find certain information which are still product specific, things like energy efficiencies, again, it doesn't change. Things like what is the reference lifetime, same products, it doesn't change. But what it does change is the type, how it's indicated in the EPD, so the type of energy, meaning what is the green mix of electricity productions in any given country. And so that's where it's really important. And we'll see in a second a bit more details of how big of a difference can make. But this is also why it's important when you look online for EPDs, make sure to find the one that is for your specific country, because otherwise you may be surprised with some of the results that you find at the end. Now, in terms of where you can deploy it at different level, product level, business level, corporate level, so EPDs allow to do higher and higher level reporting on top of the simplest assessment of the product. From our point of view, those are the ones that we provide, and we provide them through One Click. And a couple of things to keep in mind in terms of what's in and what's not in our document. As I said, product specific, but they do not include a trim charge. So what that means is that from a refrigerant point of view and the impact associated at a carbon level, we are only accounting what's been delivered from the factory. Additional refrigerant will need to be assessed separately, depending on the specific of the project. And also it doesn't include any of the interconnecting components. So it will include information about the main components, so the outdoors, the indoors, some of the remote controllers, various boxes, but not, for example, the pipework, the joints, all these pieces. From a corporate responsibility point of view, they can be used to clearly understand the various scopes of emissions when you look at yourselves as a business. So if you use our products, then we immediately become part of your scope emissions, specifically scope 3, because it's sort of the furthest away from your own business. But depending on the type of products, depending on how you use the products, they can be part of the various scopes. And again, here is a concept of you start from number 1, which is the closest to how you run your business, and then you progressively start looking at your own supply chain. So EPDs will allow you to define as a business on your daily operations what is the carbon footprint of your company. So that's also very critical and very important. So we said there are already some legislative requirements and sort of mandate when it comes to the development and the use of EPD. There are other incentives and other requirements, some of them more of at a European Union level, so maybe slightly less relevant for the UK directly. But fundamentally, we think that the UK anyway will follow in a similar approach. And fundamentally, what we're looking at here is the idea of once your company reaches a certain size, you start to have certain obligation in terms of reporting on the data. Having EPDs can allow you to do a full overview of how your business is running. So that's the critical importance of having such documents. It allows us to do comparison between different technologies and show the importance, in our case, in the HVAC industry, of why we are suddenly moving toward lower and lower GWP refrigerant. Here we compare exactly the same product, previous generation carbon refrigerant R410A, new generations with the new carbon refrigerants R32. We're still sort of in transition between the two. Here you can see exactly the same product, same makeup, same design philosophy, same everything. New refrigerant, 27% less whole life carbon. And this is massively important because it can sort of make or break your project in terms of how you're meeting carbon requirements or are you not. And that's also a tool that becomes important for a manufacturer because it does show that we're not changing for changing's sake, we're changing because we can immediately provide a positive step towards the environmental impact of our industry. So if you remember, at the beginning of the presentation, I did mention about the operational stage and how it can be really important, really critical, and it's specifically important to know where you are in the world, which document you're using. What you're looking at here is exactly the same product, so our reference product VRV system, installed in 2, 4, 6, 8 different countries. Same product, same makeup, just different countries, meaning different combinations of electricity grid and generation of electricity. Look at the massive difference. The first two slices, those relates to A, B, C categories, which is more about, again, how we manufacture the product. And then the dark blue, B category, B6, operational stage, use of energy. We are using the same energy in terms of absolute kilowatts, but those kilowatts are generated in very different ways. So you see France is predominantly a nuclear country, so the energy is considered very green, and so the impact is the smallest. Going all the way down to countries like South Africa and Poland, where there's still a predominance in terms of using coal or gas as a way to generate electricity, look at the massive impact. So again, really, really key to pick the right document for the right application for the right country. Speaking of that, I just want to give you a bit of an insight. Again, this is slightly less relevant for the UK because it's built around the French example, but I think what it will do will give you an idea of where we might be headed as well. So it's just nice to have a frame of reference of where things are going in other countries, and we can possibly derive things for our own backyard as well. But in France, there is this regulation RE 2020, which what they're doing is that they're starting to impose very, very specific limit and maximum limit in terms of, as you can see in the table on the right, kilograms of CO2 equivalent per meter squared of different building for different services. And what they do is that, as any piece of legislation does, it has some default values. And so fundamentally what they say is that, well, unless you have specific information from a manufacturer, and see if you don't know any better, you use the default that we provide, and they will allow you to complete the calculations. Problem is that some of the defaults that are currently used in some of the legislations are, to say in a less or in a more politically correct way, slightly penalizing for some of the technologies. So again, that's why it is massively important to have tools such EPDs, because it allows us to say, I'm not going to use the default value because I have a very solid, strong document certified independently that I can use to show it's not 200, it's actually way less than that. And again, when we do a bit of a practical example, and you can pause the video and run through all the numbers, but the concept here, the main difference between the two boxes, you can see that if we use the standard defaults, so we look at box number 1, we end up with 368 kilograms of CO2 per kilowatt. Per meter squared. That's slightly error there. But if instead we do use the specific number for our EPDs and that we have in our EPDs, we can drastically reduce those numbers and those values because we're actually using specific information, specific data. So it's a massive difference, and this is the true definition of make or break. So are you in or are you out of consideration for your project? The final thing that I want to just mention from, and this is going back to instead being very much more UK centric, is the idea that EPDs, because of the fact that they're not yet requested specifically by any legislations, it's kind of it's a wave. So it's a wave that is getting traction, is growing and growing and growing. But you will see that not a lot of manufacturers have this type of information available. The ones that do, like Daikin, we are still building up our library across the vast portfolio product that we have. So in the meantime, what we can do to still be able to provide some level of information, not the full whole life carbon, but only the embodied carbon, so everything but the operational stage, we do have things like the M65, and this is a CIPSI-backed scheme that allow manufacturer to do simpler calculation, but still very much valid from a point of view of assessing the carbon impact of various products. So for example, from a Daikin point of view, you will have a mix of these two documents. And then finally, where can you find all of these? Well, we want to make them publicly available. We want to make it as easy as possible. So the easiest way is to ask Google or ask ChatGPT or any of your other AI choice of the day to go and find them online, and that will probably very easily find them. But if you want to go a more direct route, you can go to daikin.co.uk/EPD. In there, you will find two things mainly: the library of all the available EPDs, and again, it's a growing library of documents. But you will also find a small brochure that essentially expands on the concept that I talked to you today. So it gives a bit more of a background in terms of what documents are, how you use them, what they are good for, what they're not good for, and so on and so forth. So if you want to learn more, that's where you can go. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your time and attention. And I believe back to you, Laura.
Yeah, thanks so much, Matteo. That was brilliant. I think just very quickly before we finish, let me ask you if you could provide a key takeaway or piece of advice for the audience today regarding the work you're doing around EPDs at Daikin. What would that be?
Stick with it. And what I mean by that is that when you start from scratch, it might seem like an impossible task to get to the point where you're able to provide EPDs. But if you stick with the process, it will progressively become easier because you are more familiar with the process, with the amount of data required. But you will also start to see the benefit, because I think sooner rather than later, it will become a true differentiator, even from a commercial point of view. The idea of saying, I got my products, I got my documents, I can win against someone that only has the product but doesn't have all the documents.
Amazing. Perfect bit of advice there to finish. That's amazing. Thanks for being here today, Matteo.
Thank you very much again for the invite.
Now we're going to move on to look at One Click LCA's EPD generator and how simple it can be to create an EPD. Over to you, Martin.
Hello everyone. Thank you, Laura, for introducing me. I am Martin McGrenaghan, the business developer for One Click LCA in UK and Ireland. I look after manufacturing, and today I want to demonstrate the EPD generator for EPD Hub v3. You can see on my window here, I've just logged in online. It is a fully SaaS-based software, so I can log in with my email credentials, and what we've got here is our main dashboard for all of the projects that I've created. You'll see a number of generic images and various different products. Some images I've loaded up, for example, you can see the precast or the HVAC product. Just to the top of my screen here, you can also see additional tabs for new and improved tools which we've released, such as the Materials Compass. We've also now got EPD Analytics and lead generation via manufacturer pages. So today I'll jump into the EPD generator itself, and I'll use a complex product such as a HVAC unit to give a brief overview of how the software operates. So what we can see here is the tool that I'm using is the EPD generator tool for EPD Hub v3. I have a number of units which I have created, as an example LCA. We have unit 1, we have a copy of unit 1 and an example I created earlier. I can quite easily delete that because I don't need that anymore. And what we can see just at the bottom here is a comparison graph for the two product designs which I have created, which allows for hotspot analysis on their A1 to A3 results. This can be filtered via classification, which you can create during your LCA. And also you can filter to explore various different categories in terms of the impacts, if you want to look at the global warming potential specifically, or any other environmental impact. So we can see here, we can home in on the life cycle stages, elements, compare various different elements, or explore all graphs at once. So this is at the front end of our design phase. If I wanted to add a new design, I can quite quickly add a new design, give it a name, set the standards and the scope. If I want to upload my data, I can just click on the drop down here, associate it with my unit, and I can do a quick bulk import via Excel. I can also connect to another design software, or I can import a predefined template with generic information from our available pre-constructed generic designs that we have available for over 130 different core construction materials. So in this case, I've just searched for HVAC product and I have uploaded that into my project here, which will run through now. So if I click on the drop down of any of these designs, I can see the modules and the lifecycle stages associated with performing the LCA and ultimately creating an EPD. So we can see it's all labeled module to module, which includes of the modules associated with generating an EPD, the EM15804, and also the life cycle stages. So if I just click on product description, that will bring me through to the design of this specific product. And here we are. So we're in the modules associated with entering our data and information. The first page, which we see here, is the product description. So it's very much basic product and manufacturer information, where you can fill in the blanks associated with your manufacturer details, your product identification, product classification, raw material composition, and any biogenic carbon content, and any REACH materials associated with that product as well. We can then move on to the declared unit, which is the second tab, which is very basic. Essentially, this is an opportunity to declare your unit in terms of your measurement of the EPD. You can also declare the mass of the declared unit and include a functional unit as well. The next tab then is our materials tab, A1 to A3. And within here, we can then begin to enter the components and data associated with our material makeup. So as you can see here, a lot of this is being pre-filled with the existing product template, which we have available for the HVAC unit. And what you can see is quite a number of various different constructions. If we hit the little plus button, it'll open up the construction of that ceiling or the polycarbonate. It'll include the injection molding and the polycarbonate to refer to that specific construction. If you click on the question marks, they will open up data cards, and you can explore the background information, the EPD program number, CAS numbers, the year of the data point generation, the standards, and the verification used. We can see here this is a generic data point associated with EcoInvent. You can also explore the description, technical characteristics, environmental profile, and other classification details. You can then select your data point and then begin to enter your quantities. You can make comments, add a classification, and then also select the mode of transport and distance from your supplier. You can select multiple modes of transport if it's coming by train, plane, lorry, whatever the case might be. And also you have various different fuel options there as well for different regions, etc. So you have availability for leg 1, leg 2. You can also then account for production losses, allocation, and biogenic carbon balancing. If we scroll back to the top of the page, you'll notice we then have these filter tabs at the top. So we do have quite a large LCA database with over 310,000 data points available. And that's made up of TM65s, product carbon footprints, industry standard data, our own generic information, eco-invent, and the world's EPD database. If I have a supplier which I know has an EPD, I can quite quickly search for that supplier name or begin to explore the product categories. So Kingspan, we're aware, have multiple EPDs in circulation. So if I search for that branded name, I can then begin to see how many matches there is within various different categories. So the local manufacturers will appear first. So you can see here I've got a number of available products available in the UK for this product category. And you can quite quickly see a breakdown of the specification and the EPD provider and the manufacturer. In this case, this is a quad core product. I can click on the question mark. Again, this will bring up the data card, but I can also open the associated EPD and begin to explore that as well. I can then also explore the description, data point background information as previously shown. I can also, if I want to use the benchmarking features, I can begin to compare various different materials and add them to folders by simply selecting these little tick boxes, and then I can add to comparison folders. And then we can explore how they weigh up against each other in terms of carbon and costs. So that's a good option for anyone who wants to explore alternatives or suppliers. We do have a lot of data within the software. We can use these filter tabs up here to break down the data by material type, country of origin, the type of data, standards and data type, etc. So if you want to explore just for EPDs, you can search just for EPDs. If there's certain standards that you want to search for, you can search for them also. And you can quite quickly save that, and that will speed up the searches within the little search engine down here. As we begin to scroll on, so if we go from manufacturing materials, we'll then have ancillary and packaging materials. And again, the same principles apply. We'll have the little search engine associated with this module, and we can begin to search for data points if we haven't already preloaded them into the software. If we want to add more data points, we can use the search engine here to find the information that we're looking for. And we can then begin to edit the quantities, the comments and classification, transport to site with that specific data point or material. You also have an option down here for any additional transport as well. Moving on to the manufacturing tab, which is A3. This will bring us through to the module where we can begin to account for any energy consumption and waste associated with the manufacturing stage. So then you can begin to search for grid rates and electricity usage or any type of fuels that you're using during production, such as biofuels, steam, liquid, gas, that type of thing. Just stalling a little second, maybe it's overheating. There we go. Maybe I have too many windows open. So now we're just onto the manufacturing stage, and we can see again it's very similar format. We have the little search engines here. Again, we can break the data down using the filter tabs at the top here. You can see we've preloaded some generic information associated with assumptions for this specific HVAC unit. So we have electricity rates, we have the consumption and the mix of that in the first stage, which is the manufacturing energy use. We then have the second stage, which is the manufacturing waste and wastewater. Again, you will have the question marks associated with each data point where you can explore the data points that are used. In most cases with these generic templates, we can see that it'll all be very much eco-invent related or generic, just to give you a foundation to begin with. You can also account for process direct emissions here as well. You then have the available construction tabs, A4 to A5, not always essential. So we've now completed A1 to A3, which is cradle to gate. A40, A5 is your transportation to the building site and installation into a site, which you can account for. Again, we've got our little search engines associated with each input, and we can search for the data which we require and then begin to populate the quantities, input classifications and comments to each. You can account for also installation waste and wastewater and any additional transport here as well. In the use stage, you'll have the B1 to B7 modules, so the likes of maintenance, repairs, operational energy, you can account for as well. So the first stage is the application usage. The second stage is maintenance. We then have repairs, replacement, refurbishment, and operational energy. This won't be applicable to all products, but usually products which require maintenance or operational energy would be applicable. We can then move on to the end of life tab, which is module C2D. And within here we can see the scenario-based assumptions. What happens to your product at the end of life? If it's a 30-year product, how does that product break down in terms of its ability to be recycled? How many components can go to recycling, or how many components need to go to incineration or to landfill, etc. This is all can be accounted for here as well. And then we can move on to the EPD description tab, which is really just adding context to your EPD report. So at the end of the assessment, you can auto-generate an EPD Word document, and this is your opportunity to pre-fill this document with your manufacturing details and the methods that you've used in terms of the data collection, any assumptions you've used, etc. for each life cycle stage, which we have already pre-populated. You then have the background report tab, which is a new tab, which we have recently added. This will give you the opportunity to interpret any of the results that you've used, again cover the standards that you've used or any PCRs that you've used during the LCA. And then we have the final tab here, which is EPD generation. Really simple enough final tab here where you can import your own EPD visuals, such as your imagery or product images along with branding, etc. And as we begin to scroll down, you can then also select the type of EPDs that you want to create or the standards and references that you want to use for the calculations. Once we're happy with all the information in each tab and it's all got nice green ticks, we can always explore the results by clicking up in the results button here. And the core environmental impact indicators for EM 15804 can be seen on the first tab here just by clicking the drop down, which is opened up, and we can see the environmental impact indicators for each life cycle stage, which the software is auto generated. You also have EM 15804 Amendment 1, which is in still circulation along with ISO 21930. You'll see these download results summaries, so you can export and download all of the information at any stage throughout. We've also got international impact indicators for Tracy 2.10. So if you're wanting to verify or publish internationally in North America, for example. And we have a few additional impact indicators here for various different reasons, such as France and Netherlands. And we also have our mass balance checker. We also have the new EPD quality checker, and we can also explore the most contributing materials as well. So you may wish to search for alternatives. Again, you can add these to comparison folders and compare the data. In terms of the available graphs, interpretation of the results, we have quite a number of options here as well. So you have the bubble, Sankey graph, tree maps, and various life cycle stages, which you can explore. And you may wish to use or export for internal purposes. Again, this can all be filtered by classification or impact category, similar to what we've seen at the front end when comparing two products, but this will be specific to its own product. Just briefly then, at the bottom here, we also have all data sources will be referenced in terms of all the data points which we have used in the assessment. So you can quite quickly see the standards, the verification, the dates, the EPD numbers, etc. And if we just click up here on the More Actions tab, and on the drop down we can see the reports which we can auto generate based on the LCA and the results which we've now created. So you can auto generate an EPD Word document. You can pick several languages here that are available as well, or you can generate a carbon footprint as a Word document and also a background report. You can also click into your data sources, and once you have an EPD Hub account set up, you can also submit your EPD directly via API to EPD Hub to be verified, with an average turnaround time currently in around 2 to 4 weeks. And if you want to play around with some of the settings here, you can change the results to scientific numbers or decimal places as well. Finally, if you wanted to create just say a self-certified PDF on a carbon footprint, you can do that also just by clicking the green Create PDF button. And that's it for today, folks. So that's a quick run through of our EPD generator tool, from data input through to report creation. Thank you very much for your time, and back over to you, Laura. Cheers.
Thank you, Martin. Great to see the tool in action there. And for those of you watching, I'd like to give you the opportunity to spend some time with one of our experts here at One Click LCA and see how our solutions could help you reach your decarbonisation goals. So you'll see a poll pop up on your screen now. Do go ahead and click yes if you'd like us to get in touch and arrange that for you. And that brings us to the end of today's session. Thank you so much for joining our Summer Sustainability Summit. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you all here. You're always welcome to reach out to us at oneclicklca.com. We'd love to connect. So thank you and have a great day.